Very cool, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with 2 or 3 questions, but then the goal is to open it up to you guys right after that, so you can start thinking of some questions, and we're going to have some mics somewhere that will pass around. Okay, so we'll work on it. So I'm always interested. So we thank you guys, by the way, for keeping it on topic. But I'm also always interested in sort of the history of the companies and the entrepreneurial, your entrepreneurial journey, that type of things. So maybe starting with Oren. So Oren, so you worked for the NSA. So you were some kind of dangerous spy. And so how does one go from being a spy to being a well-funded entrepreneur?
So I think like with everything for an entrepreneur, it comes with an idea, and we developed something pretty interesting at NSA, which we felt had a lot of wide use cases for some of the pressing challenges of our time, particularly in the big data space, and it's pretty novel, and just takes both the idea and then the trust of being able to pull your colleagues out of a place like that, and developing good partnerships with investors and with other folks that make this whole thing work. So not an easy thing to do, but certainly a lot of fun, and look forward to doing it for a few more years like Drew.
So you literally made the decision to leave and then went to like HVCs and happened to have this amazing background for it and well received.
Yeah, so for us there are a number of things that really lined up for us. So first, Accumulo, which is at the core of the score offering. Apache Accumulo is a Bigtable clone.
Which was developed by the
developed
NSA,
by NSA
right?
starting in 2008. And for us, what really aligned was the government's decision to make that an Apache open source project, and our realization that what we had developed and some of the key challenges we solved for the national security establishment could be applied, and there was a nice analog for things like healthcare and finance. And so, sort of typical path, we were able to bring together mentors, folks who have done this in the past, particularly a guy named John Frank, who founded a company called Metacarta, which was acquired by Nokia. He provided a lot of encouragement and sort of strategizing on how to do it. I don't think that there's any fundraising experience that's the same, probably. I'm sure each of us has our own unique experiences, but went out sort of traditional, had a lot of success talking with folks both on the East Coast and West Coast, and then decided to go with 2 really great firms, Atlas Venture in Boston. We're able to partner with Chris Lynch, who's an experienced enterprise CEO from HP Vertica, and Antonio Rodriguez, who's also been a very successful CEO at Matrix Partners. So.
And they made you move, right? VCs made you move from...
we don't tell the story that way, but that's one interpretation of it. For us, decision to move was really threefold. One, we felt like moving to a place like Boston, where the academic institutions, MIT, Harvard, would give us a leg up in terms of recruiting. There's also a good history of infrastructure companies, and we've been successful at hiring folks already from Endeca and from Vertica to Squirrel as we've grown the team. I think the second part is that the types of partnerships that we're able to establish with other industry leaders. So one of the big successes we have is working with folks like at the Broad Institute, who are doing very exciting things in genomics and the life science community in Boston. Give us a very different feel than having a technology born out of the government, staying in DC, continuing to service that market. Really allowed us to explode into some new markets. And then the third is the investor component. So
last
in my mind.
Thanks. So what's the Infochimps story? So you guys have evolved, right? You started building a data marketplace, which you still have?
Yeah, we do actually, yeah. I mean, it's funny that you looked at me and you're like, oh, you're far ahead of me by 2 years. That's how it seems to me, like 3 years, okay. But it seems like in the longer time that I've been running my company as compared to you at Squirrel, I feel like, man, we've had a lot of back and forth. I think maybe with any new market that there's a lot of technology that just has so much potential, but people don't really know how to classify it or what best to match it up with yet. There can be companies that have a lot of talent and spin for a little while before they figure out exactly how to leverage that. I think that for us, having realized that data content, which is what we previously used to focus on, the history of the company is a marketplace. Myself and my co-founder, Flip, are both physicists at the University of Texas. And we started the company because we wanted it to be easier for folks to share data online. I thought it was really puzzling that it was more simple for me to share like a video of myself like doing stupid things on YouTube than it was to share, let's say, a hard terabyte of really fascinating information. That was just not possible. So we decided to fix that, and we started a content marketplace ultimately. And it's almost like the analogy I use is like in building the content marketplace, we had to do all this stuff on the cloud. We had to understand big data technologies really effectively. So we developed all this infrastructure to support, really a platform to support our data marketplace. And the analogy I'll sometimes use is it's like you're operating a convenience store, and folks like come into your store and they look around. They're like all the stuff you sell here is terrible, but like, could I have like this building? This seems really nice. You know, that's like almost the reaction where folks would say, like, oh, yeah, the data's cool, and they would download lots of free data, but we couldn't get enough revenue by just selling the content. But as soon as people found out, we pivoted to, hey, this platform we built to support our marketplace, you can have one of these. That was like, yes, please, I want exactly that thing, because we, of course, I think we had approached it from a more perhaps a more technical perspective where, of course, the only problem that we have is where to get the data, because once I have the data, of course I know exactly how to analyze it, because I have a whole tool set that I like to use. Whereas I think most people were like, well, of course I already have too much data, why would I want more? And of course I have no idea how to analyze it, why would I? And so we're sort of like coming at it with exactly the right problem now, I think.
Great, thanks. So, and Eric, let me get this right. So you were at Facebook pre-IPO and you left?
That's correct. My co-founder and I, we quit Facebook pre-IPO for $17,000 in cash, left all the options, the great salaries, and moved into a one-bedroom apartment off Sand Hill Road to do Y Combinator. That was a great experience. It was kind of like this crazy sort of time when you just wanted to do something that you think you really believe in. But ultimately, you have to go and sort of step away from the standard sort of profile. It was a lot of fun. Going through Y Combinator has been an amazing experience. It's a little bit like being back in college, including like the dorm style sort of thing. So the food wasn't great. You do meet up for dinners, but there are great office hours with PG. So that was the early days.
And what happened after that?
We were able to raise a couple million. Following the program, we shut up shop in San Francisco, and then basically went stealth for 14, 15 months. Launched the product just this year in June, and been busy sort of expanding on the next phase of MemSQL.
Joe will.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yep.
Sure.
Just hold on. Let me just give you a mic so that this gets.
So it seems like you identified this interesting problem that you saw at Facebook, and then you did Y Combinator, you capitalized your company, and then you went into stealth for 14 to 15 months. I mean, to what extent were you worried during that time period? Like, what if we're late to market?
That's a great question. I think that you just know that building like a database from scratch is really hard to do, and we didn't sleep for a while, so we just thought we were going to push this out fairly quickly. And to develop a database is by no means a quick process. Doing it in 14 months is pretty much, I think, a record. We launched with the ability to join data sets, secondary indexes, a lot of the built-ins. And now we're at SQL 92 compatibility, and that's just now on 2 years. The funny thing is that we entered the program with 0 lines of code. We just had to quit first and actually start at it. And that's unusual for YC because they typically do want to see a demo or some sort of prototype. But for us, we just knew that there's just no way we can build a prototype. We either have to build it or not, and we really wanted to build it. And to kind of touch on what Facebook does, Facebook basically scaled by using memory. For 1 billion people globally, it's fast because it's memcached, which is a caching technology, and a lot of intelligence around how do you manage that cache. The whole concept of MemSQL is that you don't need a cache if you can put your data in memory and still use it. You still put it on disk as an archival mechanism, but you basically do all the joins in memory, all the aggregations, computations in memory. So we're kind of, I think, shifting sort of in-memory technology forward by getting away from key value stores.
So Eric, you all proprietary, right, as opposed to open source. Is that right?
Right. So
And Oren, you're based on open source. So how do you guys, and maybe Drove, if you have some
I would say
ideas
we're
on that,
open
how
core.
do you guys think about open source versus proprietary in terms of accelerating growth for the company and success?
I have an easy response. I don't know that this is necessarily like a hard and fast company rule, but it's a pattern that I see, which is stuff that is visual tends to be closed source. So like managers and GUIs and so on are closed, but all the stuff that was hard, we make sure to open source so that folks can make it better for us, which already happens at my company, which I love.
Well, databases are hard, and there's a bunch of databases which are open source, right?
Yeah, exactly, and they get better and better and better. And we've already seen that effect. We have a great deployment layer that lets us target multiple cloud environments so we can support Amazon, private data centers, et cetera. And we're getting more commits from folks outside the company now than we are from inside, and that's awesome. And that's because we open sourced it, and that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
I think open source is fantastic. It's a great marketing channel. I don't think it's a great business model. One of the reasons why we were able to go out and raise very quickly was just we could tell our investors that there is a real business behind it. We do love the ability for free software. I think people conflate open source and free all the time. We have a free edition for 32 gigabytes of data off our website. And I think more importantly, our inputs and outputs to the system are open source. So you can get data into our database and take it out and put it in MySQL with zero effort. So I think it's important to have data movement. But fundamentally, I don't think MemSQL would exist if we had to go and do it the open source way.
Yeah, I mean, I think open source is great, and we're big advocates for it in terms of growing the community. I think most of the technologies we talked about, have lots of open source components to it. Certainly Storm and Cumulo and Apache Software Foundation. But by no means does that mean there's not a place for proprietary layers. And certainly at Squirrel we offer proprietary components. I think Eric's point is primarily true. What we see, enterprise customers are intrigued by the idea of open source. It's a great foundation. It's a great way to get people interested in new technologies. But fundamentally, in order to make a big difference, there has to be this value add, which can be a good business model for many.
And you're a NoSQL database fundamentally, right? And Eric, you're trying to reinvent the SQL database. Do you guys consider yourselves competitors, or is it clear?
Well, I would never compete with someone on the 30 best looking list. Well, that wasn't. But I think coming from a large enterprise like the U.S. government, what we found is that there are databases, and Mike Stonebreaker, one of the leading academic researchers on this topic, is there's a database for every problem, and I think that some of the work that these guys are doing is extremely exciting, and it solves a core set of problems. So I think our goals independently are to make that core set of problem grow in a number of dimensions, but there's certainly a great deal. There's certainly a great need for the type of technology that we provide, the security, the ultimate flexibility to scale, and sort of the richness and the analytics that we can provide, and things that you can't do in memory alone. So I think for large enterprises, they'll probably want one of everything. That's probably what you saw at Facebook, right?
I mean, you can't do analytics and key value. And I think the whole notion around why NewSQL or NoSQL arose was because there was a fundamental breakdown in the relational model based on designs built in the 70s and 80s. So the way to go faster was to kind of toss everything out the wayside, go with 2 columns, a key and a value, and say, deal with it. I think the NewSQL movement, of which we are a part, is really focused on actually bringing the relational model into the 21st century. And once you have it there, you can get all that goodness back around secondary indexes and complex joins and do analytics the way we all wanted to for the last 35 years. We can do it for the next 35. So yeah, I think there's a need for NoSQL, there is a need for caching, but there's fundamentally a need for a database that just goes faster, and that's what our focus is.
Last question from me. Cloud versus on-premise. So you drove your all in the cloud. Do you think that the market is there in terms of people wanting to process and analyze their data in the cloud?
Like it is and it isn't. I think I'm not going to quote the numbers because I don't remember, but I believe that the cloud segment is certainly smaller than the on-prem segment, but it's much faster growing, and that makes sense to me. I don't think that the enterprise is going to be in the cloud anytime soon, but I do talk to a lot of customers, CIOs and stuff in the enterprise who are very okay with cloud for certain things, like for test environments or staging environments, for small projects, for stuff that originated on the web itself or social media. These things are okay. Internal sales figures and employment records are probably not okay. But I can see a world in which 10 years from now, those are also okay. A big part of that is high security databases, making it easier to stash that stuff without having leaks. It's a trend. I mean, we try to really take advantage. I'm kind of sitting in the middle for a reason, I feel. It's because I would sell both databases to a customer of mine, and I would happily sell on the public cloud or the private cloud, because the reality is it's like where we come in as a platform is trying to hit all those different places where people have needs, because it's not all the same right now.
Do you find differences between industries or verticals?
Absolutely.
Which ones
absolutely.
are the more...
Ad tech loves public cloud. They got no issues with it, except financial. It's like I was more public cloud savvier than I would have expected, but still pretty closed in my experience so far. We also do reasonably well in social, folks doing social media stuff, so PR, like advertising companies again, to a certain extent. Web analytics is a big one that almost all originates on the public cloud, so that's another option for which that's fine. We are slowly moving ourselves internally upwards in terms of customers, like larger and larger and larger accounts. And inevitably what I see is a process in which we'll engage with a customer and start out with a public cloud, call it pilot or a proof of concept. And we're able to sell that very quickly because we support the public cloud and we can get started right away. And then 3 months later, 6 months later, that customer is going to say, this has been great, but can we move it inside the data center so I can scale it up for real? And then I can say, yes, we can do that for you too. So it's a nice, I get both sides of it a little bit.
And Eric and Oren, so I know that you guys are still early in your sales cycle since the product just came out, but where do you see more demand for cloud or on-premise / data center?
On-premise, I think, is typically where we see the most demand. However, the private cloud, I think, is a way for the enterprise to stitch together commodity machinery far more affordably than buying an expensive appliance that costs $1 million. It's far easier to throw in new machines into some sort of private cloud than it is to say, oh crap, we need like another X data, for example. So I think that the public cloud is a great way to prototype, but even the public cloud gets quite expensive. I have a lot of folks that spend tens of thousands of dollars a month on EC2, and they could do it for a fraction of the price if they did it on premise. It's just a matter of where do you want to spend your dollars.
Yeah, we hope to ride the cost curve on this and just be agnostic and allow customers to make those choices for themselves. I think we're probably pretty far away for customers with serious data rights issues for moving into the public cloud. And I expect a lot of private and on-premise solutions to materialize for the really big enterprise, big data problems.
This is a question for me. Do you guys support virtualization very well in your databases, or is that kind of anathema?
We actually run great on virtualized hardware. That's sort of the dirty secret about the cloud is that it does virtualize your I/O. So if you use a typical database on EC2, you're going to see latencies on the order of 60 milliseconds on average, which is quite poor. So we actually love the cloud because we actually excel. You can't virtualize memory. So whenever you go with a MemSQL and EC2, for example, you will see like 1 millisecond response times, and a Postgres or a MySQL is on the order of 60. So the cloud is great, but it does ding you on the virtualized I/O regardless.
Great, thank you. Well, let me turn it over to you guys. So just state briefly your name and company, if applicable.
My name is Carlos, and I work for Lockheed Martin. I would like to ask a question about how do you...
It's a big defense contractor, if you don't know. Yeah.
How's your
So I take it it's for Drew, the question.
the security parameters? Do you follow OWASP, or you just follow your own proprietary metrics for security and validation of your products?
Yeah, so it's so with Squirrel and with Apache Cumul, it's sort of a two-step process. What we try to do is to learn from a lot of lessons learned at NSA, and that is to embed in the key structure of the database the policy arguments that are required. So for you, it's probably the classification. For folks in healthcare, it could be HIPAA compliance, could be Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, or it could just be the individual business rules, and those can be embedded in human-readable, Boolean semantic across the data. And then we try to separate the authorization and authentication from the database right, and do that outside in sort of a third-party mechanism.
Or do you follow OAuth as a policy?
You can embed any policy that is necessary, right? So it's a totally flexible schema for taking your policy, translating it, and then doing that consistent with however your enterprise needs to operate. So, yeah.
So one of Mandeep Singh, Bloomberg. One of the reasons why big data has become so popular is because it can analyze unstructured data. So can you talk about how your databases tackle the unstructured data problem? And also, do you use any particular data integration vendor?
What was the last question?
Do you use any particular data integration vendor?
Vendor, I see, yeah. So we're a very structured tool as a relational database. What we typically see with unstructured data is it's far easier to write a lightweight parser around that log file, for example, and get it structured very readily. Then you can start doing your joins, your complex analytics with that. There certainly is a need for unstructured analysis, but at that point you really are kind of dusting off the Python manual and doing it sort of by hand. So there is a tool for everything. We pride ourselves in being sort of the structured relational sort of integration. And with regard to data vendor management, whatever have you, the standard tools would work with us.
So we really excel at handling unstructured data. It's one of the key drivers, sort of in the pedigree of the technology being developed. And for us, it's about being able to re-ask and revisit the data, right, and not worrying about the schemas up front and applying that structure. It has proven time and time again to be extremely effective in solving those problems. And in terms of the data integration part, we tend to kind of be just agnostic and support services to. However best, for folks.
Is it still working? Oh, okay, it's working. Carter Schoenwald, well posed. So one thing I heard you guys variously mention in different ways is data and memory locality. And so one thing I'm wondering, perhaps the most interesting answer might be from the MemSQL guy. I'm terrible with names. Is Eric, okay, and perhaps the others, is to what so at some level when you have this distributed infrastructure, you obviously care about locality at the distributed level. To what extent, in terms of making your own products awesome enough in terms of your own metrics, do you care about sort of data locality and cache locality, the sort of per node kind of stuff? To what extent does that matter in your engineering or product, or at least your own personal vision of your products?
So I'll take a first crack at that. So we actually don't need to cache anything because we live in memory.
L1, L2, L3.
I'm not, sort of. I don't think it would take too long to explain going into how we actually manage that. But at that point, you're talking just a couple megabytes for either of those caches. I will say that you get the biggest bang for your buck by just going from disk to memory, and then from there, the CPU accessing L1, L2 is another sort of process. But if you worry about data locality, it always is a great idea to put your database next to your application. But for that very reason, you also want to have your data stored elsewhere in the event that data center goes down. So data locality is important. In our distributed setup, you don't have to worry about data locality. We distribute the data for you. But in terms of getting the biggest bang for your buck, just putting data from disk into memory, you'll see on the order of a 50x improvement.
I meant more so just making your shit faster.
It's already pretty fast. I mean,
That's the company's motto: make your shit faster.
Yeah. It's pretty fast already, yeah.
So, yeah. Well, we're always interested in making our shit faster, but one of the things that we've tried to do is to not really optimize too much for any one particular scenario and just kind of take this lazy optimization, right? So we can do many things sort of well. So, I think there's this kind of trade-off that's implicit in your question, and our approach has been to support a diverse set of workloads and not to. An example would be, a Formula One race car is a really fucking fast car, and it can go around a track and do lots of really cool stuff. But I could probably do a lot more things with 10,000 Kias in this city today than I could ever do with a Formula One race car. And so, we're really trying to manage a very diverse set of workload, assuming that we have tens of thousands or hundreds of users simultaneously, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of apps, right? Hundreds of data sources, and not really optimized for any one condition underneath that. Oh.
I'm Benjamin Swami. I'm from XCR. It's a growing consulting company. I'm interested in Accumulo and SQL. Yeah. So, and the reason is, we deal with a lot of business rules which won't break easily, including Basel, SOX, and HIPAA. So how do you find, use cases like these and entering into enterprise? Because again, it's a break or hack or the enterprise level. How do you find the right match? And how do you grow from there?
Yeah, so are you asking sort of like how do we go to market or like yeah, so one of the
Yes.
key.
Make money.
Oh, how do you make money? Well, that's,
No, we don't discuss this here.
yeah, we don't.
Because I'm banking on you. So.
Okay, well, I think we make money through people like you, right? Helping. No, but what we see out there in the marketplace are if we think about the market in two axes, right? There are people who are hyper concerned about performance, right? And there are people who are hyper concerned about security, and then there are groups who are concerned about the combination of these. And so groups like emerging e-health startups, groups like some of the large groups on Wall Street, some of the groups in kind of the social space that are being hit by these new regulations and privacy concerns, right? They're all facing this kind of pain point, and what it demands is this sort of data-centric security approach. And we're actively engaging with those folks. And the key thing that we're looking for as we target customers, as we bring customers on, is when does the combination of not only being compliant, but also being able to bring more data to bear to solve your question, when does that give you a multiplying factor in being able to generate revenue for your own business and being able to answer new questions and potentially being able to see things that have never been seen before. So I think that's the real potential. That was what I was trying to get at in my talk earlier, is that when you can bring more data together, right, you get cooler shit, right, as the gentleman would say in the back. And the way to be able to do that is to be able to build trust and to be able to secure the very sensitive parts of your information that have been prohibitively kept separate for basically forever, right? And we have an opportunity to give people a new tool to unlock that they've never had before, and it's really proven to scale and to handle a lot of the things that enterprises want.
Sorry, who was it? Okay.
Hi, my name is Alexander Yankov. I'm from Cypher Capital, and my question is for Eric. You mentioned that you have a lockless process for your asset database. How do you manage to have a consistency distributed across multiple databases without having locks between those physical databases?
Oh, you mean the physical leaf nodes?
Yes.
So it's a shared nothing architecture, and I think that's something that is probably the simplest way to scale. So a shared nothing architecture basically states that any node in that system is unaware of the other nodes in that system. So what you're trying to ask is, do you want to do cross-shard joins? And the answer is very rarely yes. You typically want to avoid cross-shard joins to maintain performance. So if you treat every leaf node as its own sort of entity that is unaware of its adjacent leaf nodes, it gives you an easier way to scale when you actually want to scale up or down. Now, scaling up, I think, is a pretty common sort of need, but the converse, which is scaling down, is actually another need as well, meaning that you want to repurpose those machines when you don't need to store 5 terabytes, you just need 2. And if you basically had to have a shared state across those leaf nodes, that's a shared everything effectively. It actually increases the chatter in the system so that one delete in one node causes up 50 deletes everywhere else. And you can imagine that with enough traffic coming into that distributed system, the internal chatter would eventually overwhelm the external chatter. So for that reason, we go with a shared nothing architecture.
So, Oren, right here.
Okay.
I just so a second ago you were talking about how Accumulo would be able to enable people to share data in ways that they wouldn't, and enable varieties of data to be combined in ways that they hadn't been able to before. But then, if I remember, Infochimps started out with that. It seemed, I mean, I might be wrong on from what I read, but it seemed like that it started out with that vision of combining lots of a variety of data sources, and you found that at Infochimps, Drew, that it was moving the functions around was more important than moving the data. Could you speak to why you made that change, and why I see that you still have the data marketplace around, but why is that less important than the functions?
Are you kind of trying to sort of suggest there's a tension between my saying that people didn't really want the data, or that the functions are more important, the analytics is more important, and then Oren's product, or Accumulo rather, being really, really excellent at helping folks share, and is that a tension that you're kind of drawing to?
Well, I find that I do data science consulting, and I find that variety of data is very important, and so I value things like Infochimps, where if I needed to, say, enrich my data with a new data set, and various people are trying to enable this. So I was sort of surprised to not see it be as popular as.
Maybe the answer would be that I find it useful too, dude. I'm puzzled as well. But maybe the reality is that the folks that buy the data buy it from folks like Bloomberg and other places, and they've spent a lot on it, and they've taken it and they've bought it and they put it in a little box, and they did that 40 other times, and now they have all these little boxes, and they're like, I have so much data. I don't need to go get monkey data at this point. Like, this is absurd. Like, I need tools that help move this stuff together. And then I think at that point, Accumulo becomes actually awesome, because then they say, well, I could put it all in this one thing, and I can just say where I got it from and who's allowed to access it, and then I don't have to solve that problem, and that's a bonus. So I feel like data mashing together and shareability is hugely important, and something that folks are willing to pay for within an organization for internal data. Maybe not necessarily, at least in our company's experience, for data that is coming externally or that is public.
Yeah, so we think that.
I agree with that.
Oh no, I agree with that. I do think that the monkey data is awesome.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I told you that. I think that what Squirrel and what Accumulo do is make Druve one of our customers, right? Because what we can do is we can convince people like CMS, right, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, who typically only provide small samples of their data to researchers, right? They do minimization and masking of the data, making it sort of useless. And by giving them this extra trust, right, to provide data, right, and applying these policies, right, we can make these data marketplaces more powerful, right? So we hope to provide that sort of infrastructure so that data can be more freely available and create that unlocking mechanism for advice, arguing about the coolness of the data part, right? We want all the data.
When we built our marketplace, we of course had to implement an access control policy for all the data that we'd ingested, and Accumulo didn't exist at that point. Or at least we weren't aware of it existing.
Yeah, it existed. It was just
secret. Yeah. And so, of course, what we did is we built a bad version of it, right?
Suboptimized, right?
Thanks, man. Good.
Hey, Matthew.
But I just want to be clear, we're not trying to become a data marketplace, right?
Hey, Matthew Rutley. I work at Rakuten, doing mostly e-commerce analytics. Question for Eric. All the data scientists I know, myself included, we're all using MongoDB. Haven't used SQL for years, very rarely even see it implemented anywhere. Everyone's using MongoDB, Redis, because we just love the flexibility of it. Why should I use MemSQL over MongoDB?
It's a good question. I think that fundamentally you're sort of asking a more religious sort of argument over SQL versus NoSQL. And in all truth, that is as close to a religious sort of experience as I think you can have in data. I tend to think that SQL is easier to engage with than having to basically store the schema in every element. Mongo itself, I think, it has a beautiful, clever interface, which is exposing JSON. The downside is that it basically has made a lot of things more difficult for the developer at the end of the day. So, from the perspective of having to store a column name in every single element, so if you store the column as like, let's go with science for the column name, you're going to repeat that word science for that column name in every single element. Whereas with the database, relational-wise, you would just call it once. Mongo also has a global write lock. So one writer will block everyone else until it completes. And we're concurrent. So there's just various use cases, I would say. I mean, Mongo is very flexible, and if that's what you need, all the more for you. But if you want sort of a real-time analytics package, SQL is probably the best way to actually engage with the data still.
François here. I'm from Cubem. I'm building reporting solutions for enterprises. A question which is not really about infrastructure, and I'm not sure you are able to answer it yet. I'm curious about what you observe or you're thinking about data obsolescence. What I mean is, as you said, big data, but it's getting old quite quickly. So do you already see patterns like, like above 6 months, it's not getting too much interesting and so forth. So it's getting dumped out of the system. By the way, I'm not too sure, subsidiary question, whether your solutions are positioned as persistent solutions or platforms to which you move the data to get it analyzed. Maybe it's something to clarify. But anyway, so main question is, data getting old, and do you think big data can also keep data if it's getting compressed or aggregated? I even believe Drew might have some thinking about this through his former tentative.
My initial reactions to the question are, to me it seems it's a little bit related to the last question about, hey, Redis and MongoDB are so hot these days, why SQL? I mean, and I like what your comment about Stonebreaker's claim as well, right? Like, pick a problem, there's a database for that problem. I think that there's an element of that. One way that, just one out of many, many ways to think about how to organize data in a large enterprise infrastructure is temporally. To your point, saying that, okay, there's data that's less than like a second old, that's like really scary. My company doesn't do too many customer solutions like that, but I bet the financial world deeply cares about that time regime. Then there's stuff that's like a few seconds old to like minutes or hours maybe, or maybe days, I don't know. And that's a great Mongo use case right there. We love Mongo for that aggregation purpose. And then there's a regime which is like much, much, much longer, and you have to go to, driven by the sheer volume of historical data you're expected to be able to analyze, you have to go to solutions like SQL or HBase or other things like this. Aggregation is a tool you can use to obviate some of this pain that you'd feel historically, but it'll only save you so much before you start losing actual information that you care about. So at the end of the day, what do you actually do? What do we do as a platform provider who offers multiple databases? We say, well, if you really want to solve all those problems, which are actually separate problems, guess what? You're going to have several databases that you're going to use, and we'll help you pipe data around each one of those and so deal with some of that complexity for you, but don't expect like the tool that was designed to do this to suddenly do all of this as well.
Yeah. My name is Charles Amor from Unique Sky. I'm actually coming out with an invention designed to host 5 accounts categories. There'll be personal account for everybody. Yeah. But with this invention, there's 2 special features in it that will allow every nation on the planet to use a GPS without using a satellite. I'm trying to ask you guys where will you guys fit in developing that feature on that network?
Could you say the question again? So there's GPS and...
It's actually a very big invention that myself, I can't even invest in it. It's not an invention that me and you could put all resources together to make it happen. This is an invention that requires a whole nation to support it. But there's a special feature in the network. It's like Facebook, it's like Twitter, but it's not like those networks right now. There's a feature, 2 features in it that allows every nation from North America to Europe, to Asia, to Africa, to everywhere, to use a GPS without using a satellite. I'm trying to ask you guys, where will you guys fit in developing that feature on the network regarding data?
I think the question is, you're asking hypothetically, your stuff sounds like so good it's going to be part of the network. Is that right? And when can we, as users, expect to benefit directly, easily, quickly from these new things that might be as catalytic as GPS? Your tools sound in a similar realm. Mike, and having mic switches that go on.
So, could you summarize that again?
So I think the question is,
if the question isn't clear, I suggest we take it offline. I mean, those guys are going to be around for a little while, so
I'm happy
it
to
sounds
talk to
like
you
you have
about
a project
it,
you want to talk about. So I think that's not the ideal venue just right now, but there'll be networking after that. So why don't we do that?
My question is perhaps also a little out of the ordinary.
Esoteric.
You talked, you talked about your missiles being good and bad, and Oren, you talked about the potential goods, great benefits to society, but you didn't talk about potential not so good stuff or the risks that are associated with big data. And that's, I mean, look, I love big data. It's really amazing to do a lot of things, but there also are, I think we may have been experienced. Have you ever seen or been touched things you hadn't done because of your own morals or ethics, or what are the, if you could elaborate on the downsides?
The dark side.
I can offer somewhat of a personal response. I know that one of the big motivators for me to wanting to start the data marketplace was not just I want to make it easier for scientists to share information, which was definitely a big thing, but it was also I feel like privacy is going to die eventually, like it's going to be over, we can't stop it, it's already happened, sort of thing. But it doesn't bother me so much that I don't have privacy. It would bother me if I couldn't see what everybody else knew about me. So I was like, well, let's create a place where, fine, I'll admit to you that there's data about me out there, but I want to be able to see what it is. And I like that idea. I like that when data is open and transparent and easily shared and easily indexed and discovered, that you can limit a lot of the bad stuff that people can do with it. And I think when you get to places where certain individuals or governments or entities have a monopoly on particular kinds of information about the world, then it gets really scary.
Or individuals, I mean.
Sure.
If you don't mind, I'd also like to.
Yeah, no, I was going to say we're almost at the end of the hour, so we're gonna. But the last question goes to Joseph. But after that, you guys are going to be around for a little while, right? So
sure.
Go ahead. Last question.
Oh, so I was also going to give an answer to this question about, what happens. Like, we were talking about the question of big data good versus big data evil, and. This is actually just sort of a side project of mine or an area of research of mine. And the argument I've made, and I'm preparing more work on this, is data science is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good and it can be used for evil. At least in sort of security, it's very common to have discussions about black hat, and in the big data world, we don't really talk about black hat that much, and I think that's actually kind of too bad. Luckily, we don't have too many black hats in data who are very sophisticated, but I think that as big data becomes a bigger market and it becomes more lucrative, that we will see more unscrupulous actors. So I think this question of black hat data science is a very important question that must be looked at.
Great, thank you. So quick things, first of all, thanks to Lauren, our event manager. 2, happy holidays to everyone. 3, please join me in thanking our speakers tonight. And we'll see you in January. Happy holidays.